available. All right, this meeting is now being recorded. That's great. Welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started. So first of all, let's talk about what we're going to cover in this presentation. We're going to talk about creating reusable automated test steps in the test manager. We're going to talk about creating a coded UI test from a manual test case in the Microsoft Test and Lab Manager. We're going to create a coded UI test directly within Visual Studios, and we're going to run through some exercises of executing the test. So first of all, we're going to start at the very basic level, and we're going to talk about using the fast-forward features of the test manager. This will mostly be a demo-based presentation. What we're covering within the test manager is use an existing test case. We're going to start with one that's in there that's stored in the test manager. We're going to run the test case and select to record the actions. In between each step, we're going to make sure that each step is flagged as completed. This kind of gives an indicator to the test manager where the start and end of each step is when it does its replay. And then once it's completed, we'll go through a demonstration of how to re-execute it in more or less an automated manner. It's not really automated in the sense that it's like a traditional sense. It really is just a macro playback of the test. So let's just go ahead and go to a predefined test that I have. And let's see if I can get my mouse to respond. Real nice. There we go. All right, so first of all, I've got some pre-canned tests that I've set up. And we're going to work with this one right here. It's verify an app can identify with an equilateral triangle. Sounds pretty exciting. A real basic example. I'll start just by opening the test, and we'll see that it's pretty basic. And I keep losing my mouse here. I apologize. But some of the steps are hidden here. There's only about 8 steps here that are in the test. What I'll do is I'll flip back and we'll try to do something here to get my mouse to come back. There we go. And there's only a few steps, 5 steps in here. And we'll go through and record the steps and do a playback. I'll do a little bit of change to it, and we'll go from there. And so first of all, I'll hit the test there. This puts us into a test mode. First of all, we planned the test. I already had it written out. Now we want to actually go in there and test. So the purpose of this test is to verify the app can be identified as equilateral triangle. To do that, I'm going to select to run the test. Let me get up a cheat sheet that I've got here. And it's going to be on my desktop, which I did not open, it looks like. And we'll give that no, that's not going to work. And let's go ahead and pull that up. All right, there we go. Just so I can get my my stuff that I needed to get this started. Go back here and go ahead and run. Real basic application, not a whole lot to it. So we'll start by just running it. Now this is something that if you're doing a manual test that you're going to do as well. So the first thing it's going to tell us is, because I had already had loaded this, is like, well, I can't do that. That's okay, because we're going to start the test. I'm going to select to create an action recording. When I do that, it's going to create the macro recording behind the scenes. So I hit start. I'm going to say my first step here is to start the application. Well, to do that, I'm going to go open up a run dialog. And you'll see that I've already got the thing in there, but we'll go ahead and hit OK. and it's going to bring up my application using the click once feature. And there we go. There's my application. Notice how it says currently recording, telling me that it is now recording this application. I started it. I'll go ahead and press that. Real basic test. I want to enter 1 into each field, so I hit that. So that's done. Enter 1. So that's done. Enter 1. I'll say that's done. Next step is press the determine button, and the message box is going to display equilateral. So I'm going to hit that. It says equilateral. All right, so I'm good to go. And we'll flag that as done. Now, what we've done here is we've recorded the steps. We'll go ahead and hit end test. Collecting information, it's saving it up into TFS so that you can pull this down on another computer or on this computer at a later time and rerun. So the way I set this up, it's not going to run perfectly. I know that because part of the demonstration will be to see what happens when you want to fix the test. So we'll just go ahead and start by, notice we have a play button up here. I've got the first line highlighted. I'll press play. What's going to happen is it's now going to go through and do everything that I did. It's going to start the application. All right. And we can play the next step. And notice now that it's, without me doing anything other than play, it's entering the value into the fields over here. Pretty basic. The idea here is as a tester, I don't have to sit here and type things in over and over, which makes things a little less boring for me maybe. It's going to introduce a lot less error because it's going to be exactly what I want it to be entered time and again. I can pass this off to somebody who really doesn't know anything about the script and have them successfully run the test. And then this final step here is press the determine button and check my expected result. When I play that, notice that what happens is I can't really validate the value that popped up on the message box because it all happened at one swoop. Well, that doesn't do me any good. So what I need to do is I need to stop the test and then just go back and modify my test so that I can add those steps in that are missing. So we'll come over here. This is test 8. We'll go back into the plan mode. And right here in this last step, I'll add a couple of lines. I'll just say close the message box. And there's really no expected result with that other than it closes. And you close the application. You can put in whatever specifics you want in there. Now when I save this, if it's going to let me, for some reason my mouse just does not want to play with this particular screen. And my save does not want to help me. Well, we've got contingencies. We have our ways. Let me see if this saved. Got the wrong button. Yeah, almost there. Sorry about this. And for some reason the save button's not coming up. I think this is a problem with, it looks like, with maybe how Visual Studio wants to function there. That's okay. We'll go in there and run tests. We'll fake our way through this. No, so that didn't work. So let's close that. I'll give us one more shot. Oh, good save here. That's interesting. Of course, this worked every time I tried it previously, but now it's not. Well, we'll go to contingency. So what we'll do is we'll go into this test case, which does kind of the same thing, but it actually has the items that we wanted to correct in place. So we'll start by overriding the existing action recording. Hit start. At this point, well, that didn't work either. Let's try this again. I'll reset. There we go. So what we'll do is we'll do like we had done before. That's certainly not the most exciting part of this demo, but we'll get to the better stuff here in a second. And of course I forgot, so notice how I can reset. I forgot to hit my my flag, my step is complete, so I can go in there, start the test again. All right, there we go. Flag it as complete. One, and that's complete. One in here. That's complete. One here. That's complete. Now I can hit my determine. I can validate. It says, okay, that looks like it says equilateral, which matches that. So that test passes. I want to close the message box, hit OK. That's complete. I want to close the application, and that's complete. Now I can hit end the test, override existing recording. Now I'm good to go. So I can save for next usage, but I can now reset the test. Do I want to reset the test? Yes. Just for, and I won't overwrite this time. I'm just going to start it again. And you'll see now we've got all the fields in there. So we'll go ahead and play this. Oops, don't mess with the mouse while it's playing because it makes it upset. And it will go ahead and start the application for me like it did before. And that comes up. And now, to kind of fast forward through some of this, I can multi-select several of these and play those and see how it's going to play everything all together. All right? And now I'm not recording. I can just flag these as complete. Press the determine button to see if it passes. It says equilateral. I like that. Now I just want to close the message box and shut her down. So I'll select the last two, and the test is done. So it kind of gives a little bit more ease to some of the repetitiveness of some of the testing. It makes life a little bit easier. Notice down here you've got a little few things that we can view. It's not showing it now, but if I was to run the test, it should give me the feedback of what's going on. But it's not. I think there's a problem with running this in the presentation mode. But nonetheless, we'll reset the test. And we'll go ahead and close that down. I'll go ahead and save and close. So now we can see that the test is run, it's passed, and that's good. So you can look in your results, and you'll see that the test case passed. I didn't flag these as passed, so it doesn't really show up, but the test in general passed, which is good. So you can see our prior test runs. We can create bugs in this location. So just kind of a quick rundown of some of the things you can see in the test manager when you complete those. So probably one of the more interesting aspects of this is not so much the coded UI, or I'm sorry, the test manager and how to replay those as some of the macros, but rather how to take this and use it within the coded UI test area. So this is all done through Visual Studios. And if anybody's done unit testing, you're aware of the unit test framework and a lot of the stuff that you can do with that. That's been extended to include the ability to test against the UI. We did have a bit of that capability previously, but now with 2010, that's been expanded into a specific test type called a coded UI test, which includes a framework. And one of the nicer features is that you can now do UI testing directly against a web browser. That is something that was not available previously. You had to do everything through a service if you wanted to test on the web browser. So it's kind of a nice feature here. And what I'll do is I'll go ahead and demonstrate what it takes to start a coded UI test, to execute, and then go through some of the features that are involved with that. So to do that, we go into Visual Studios. Now you'll see that I started by creating a project called Triangle, which is my basic application I'm working with here. And I created a project called Triangle Test. This is started just like, so I can go through the process of showing you. When you go in there and add a project, you have a type test that you can create. And this is kind of nice in that it automatically gives you some of the features. Notice how it's put in automatically unit test. You can go in there and type in whatever you want to give it a name. I'm not going to create a new one because we already have one started. But what I will demonstrate is adding a coded UI test and walking through that process. So I select coded UI test. Now the very first thing that Visual Studio asks me is, do you want to create your coded UI test? I can select one of these options, or I can cancel. If I cancel, it just gives me a basic test. Well, what I want to do is I want to use an existing action recording. So what I'm going to want to test from is from our previous test within the test manager. So this is really nice in that if these tests already exist out there, if testers run through this and recorded those actions, I can now pull this into Visual Studios and leverage those tests that they've created. So I'm going to use an existing action recording. I'm going to hit OK. It's going to bring up a query screen for me. Oops, I need to connect to my server. I just happen to know that my test case that I was running was ID 12. I can run through various queries to search if I'm not aware of what it was. Here I find my one test case, verify the app can identify an equilateral triangle. I select OK. It does some thinking. And then you'll notice what it's done for me in this, I would want to rename this if I was to be doing this in real life, but it's pulled in all the test steps that I recorded. So you'll notice that I've just like the test case itself, I start the application, I enter 1 inside 1 field, enter 1 inside 2 field, enter 1 inside 3 field, press the determine button, close the message box, close the application. Pretty straightforward, but things you need to be aware of is that if you have very long descriptions, you can end up with some very long method names. You're welcome to go in there and modify these as you need to. And you want to make sure that you don't get any ambiguity as you create the test, because you can end up with things that kind of have the same name. So just be very, very careful about that. So first thing I'm going to do is I just brought this test in. So you saw me actually bring it in. You saw Visual Studio generate the test for me. I can just take it now and run it. I'm going to run it in debug mode. And it's going to probably try to run a couple tests for me. It's going to build it. And got some nice stuff. Now you'll notice right away what it's doing is exactly what I had demonstrated in the previous Custom Lab Manager. And voila. So lots of excitement there. You saw it run through. If I go to my test results, you'll see that it passed. Now, if you're sitting back, you're probably wondering, well, gee, what exactly passed? Well, the only thing that passed was those steps. The steps ran. But there is no validation on this test. So when you think about it, that doesn't do us a whole lot of good to just run the script and not have some kind of validation routine. So what I'm going to show you next is how to insert some validation into your coded UI test. Very simple. So we want to insert a validation right here after press the determine button. We know, because we've seen the test, that after we press the determine button, that message box is going to pop up. And that's going to have the text that we want to validate. To do that, we can go in here, we push enter, we can right-click, and it says generate code for coded UI tests. This gives us an option, just like we saw when we first created the test, of using the coded UI test builder or use an existing action recording. Well, we're going to use the coded UI test builder this time because we don't have any code in place that we can throw in there. So go ahead and select that. Notice what this is doing. It brings up a little window. This gives us a toolbar. It says start an action recording. We've got a target that pointer that we can drag to add assertions, which is what we're going to do, and we've got the option to generate code. So one of the things we have to do, we could have, I suppose, have put a stop in the code and run it up to that determine and put the application in the state that we wanted to test, but just because there's not a whole lot to it, what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and run it myself. And notice I don't have the record button started, so it's not recording these steps. If you're doing this where you want to record steps, you want to have that button pressed and be recording. So I brought it to the state of where it says equilateral, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this over my box, and it's going to give me properties that I can check. One of the things I want to do is I'm going to check the name of this text and make sure that it says equilateral. And I've got the option here to add assertion. So I can add the assertion. I want to make sure that it's equal to equilateral. Can't see that. I hit OK. Put a little check mark there to let me know that I've added that assertion. That's all I wanted to do. Now I'll go ahead and generate my code. We'll just call it assert method for right now because, hey, that's a good explicit name. And I want to add that and generate. Now we're done. So I'll just go ahead and close this. It's going to bring this back up. You'll notice it's inserted my assert method. It's all behind the scenes. But now if we run this test, it's going to mean something. So I'll just go ahead and rerun it again. It'll blast through the same steps. It's going to kind of look the same. But behind the scenes, what it's going to do is change what its actions, and it's going to actually test to make sure that we have the value of equilateral on that message box. Well, I brought it up a second time. I didn't close it down. That's okay. And it said I'm unhappy with that because of I left that thing up. Okay. Well, we'll stop that. We'll stop the playback. We'll come back here. We will hit OK on that. And we'll go into this bit of code here in a second. We'll rerun this. It should we'll just run through it. It's run through the same step. All very exciting here. Hopefully you guys are seeing this where it's running through its steps on the presentation. And it's done. So if we come back down to test results, you say, okay, well, it's done again. So really behind the scenes, what do we got going on here? Well, let's just go into the assert method here. And we'll go to the definition there. And you'll see here it's generated within the UI map designer.cs a little method for us. And here's our actual assert, where it's checking our expected value with the actual name of the control. So if we go to the expected value, you'll see that it said, well, this is equilateral. Well, if we want to have some fun with that, we can maybe change that, go back to the test, and we can rerun it. And we'll see that as it's running through, it's going to run through the same steps again. By now, I'm pretty sure it can figure out the application can identify an equilateral. All right, so you'll see right here what it's done is it's asserted. It says that it expected one value and it read another value. Not real ideal that we get something to fail and stop in the middle of the test. When you debug, that's going to be your mode that it goes into. Let's go ahead and run the test in non-debug mode. Just execute it. You'll see we have slightly different behavior. This time, rather than seeing it stop, whoops, oh, I forgot to kill that, so we'll see how far it goes. It's going to, hopefully it's going to run. We'll just stop this. There it goes. Oh, it failed. Okay, there we go. Wasn't sure if it was going to work or not. Let's look at what the test results were. And it's going to say, okay, so it doesn't like me having that up more than once. Let's run this again. We'll solve that here in a few seconds as well. Good demonstration of making sure that you're in a base state before you run a test. And we'll run this again real quick. All right, there we go. So now we've got, it didn't stop this time. Notice it just logged the error that it failed, right? So it said, hey, there was something here that I expected. It wasn't really what I wanted. Therefore, I'm going to fail. Well, let's see what we can do to extend some of these things that we're seeing here. Maybe we want to change the assert a little bit, and I'll continue with our bad naming convention. I'll change this to assert 2. And what we're going to do is we're going to open this up to, because maybe there's more than one triangle we want to test for. So we'll go ahead and put in a parameter, triangle type. And then what we're going to do is we're going to change our assert so that we're going to be able to pass in the type of triangle that we're going to test against. So what this is going to do is give us a little bit more flexibility so that we can test multiple triangle types, which is, I think there's more than one, right? And so it gives us more flexibility in our test. We can now do a little bit of data-driven, and so we just go back to the coded UI test, not the result, sorry about that, coded UI test, and we're going to change this to 2, and we're going to pass in the value that we want to validate. And then we can save that, and we can rerun the test. You see very quickly you can add, oops, I forgot to shut that down. Well, we'll handle that in a second. You can very quickly add some more flexibility to your tests and give a little bit more to, we're just going to shut this down and rerun it. One of these days I'll remember to check that. We'll go ahead and run. And but it's important that as you're doing a coded UI test as opposed to unit test that you enter a lot of variables, that you check various situations. If you have data-driven rather than a specific result, it adds a lot more flexibility, even to your unit test. There it is, it asserted. Now just to show that there's still some potential problems with the test. If I assert, even if I run it in run mode, it's going to run the test, but when it asserts, it leaves the application in a state that doesn't let me run the next test very well. So as we've seen a few times, here's our fail, but it always leaves this guy up, and that really is a problem. So what we can do to fix that real quick is, let's put a little try around this. And so I'm going to try finally. And now, even though we fail, we can, we'll just go ahead and rerun the test. We have the ability to very quickly run the test and validate our value. I purposely left that as a fail so we can demonstrate that it's going to give us a little bit of cleanup there. And now if we go to our test results, we'll see that it failed once again, but you'll notice that the application has shut down. So that's just a real quick showing of how you can build a little bit more flexibility into this. When you're playing or testing around with the UI, there's more to it than just passing and failing the test. You've got to make sure that you set your application into a state that's ready for the next test. And here I'm just giving a demonstration of of changing the value back to the proper value, that it will now run the test and continue, and things are good. All right. So one final thing that I'm going to demonstrate here is I'm going to just record a test here in Visual Studio. And that pretty much does the same thing as we had done before. We're just going to record a test. We're going to use the test builder this time. It's going to bring up this toolbar that we had before. This time, we're just going to start a recording. We'll do the same thing we had done before. And you can start this anyway. Use an icon. Just make a call directly to just like open, so you don't have to do it my way every time. We'll do the same test. Hit OK. One thing I did not demonstrate there was in the middle of the test was that I could have included an assert there at any point. So you can pause the test, add an assert. We'll generate code. It's called recorded method 1. That's always a real good naming convention. It's going to add the code. We'll close this down. Okay. So you'll notice one of the things it does, my assert method 2 from my previous test is now showing as an invalid method. One thing that I'm using the release candidate, I'm not sure if this has been fixed in RTM, but when you regenerate code from coded UI tests, what's going on behind the scenes is all the recorded actions are stored in an XML file. And that XML file is used to regenerate the code. Because my new assert does not live in that XML file, it overwrites any pre-existing or changes that I might have made. Something you have to take note of is if you are generating or modifying your code or generating your own methods, is that you create some different classes of those codes, but they don't get automatically overwritten. So it shows up as an error. I would have to, if I forget, if I have it checked in the TFS, I'd need to bring it down and then create the new classes, or I'd have to recreate my methods. But so what we've got here is the recorded method, and it did not. Interesting. It did not like me there. It did not add my method. Nice. Okay. But if I go into, oh, there it is right there. I'm sorry. Couldn't see it. So if I go into that definition, you'll see in this one, rather than having the steps generated in my test, it has the steps generated into my recorded method in the background. And you'll see that if you understand what the method names are, it kind of gives you a good explanation of what's going on there. All these items are things that you can modify at a later time if you have things saved away. So make sure you always have these saved away. All right. So we jumped through several of the slides here. We did run a test case in the coded UI test. We created a coded UI test in the test case. We did it from the test manager. We did it through Visual Studios. One thing we did not do when we created a new test was add it to a different file because it may have been overwrit it. We did parameterize a new test case and execute. We modified the error handling. That wraps up the demo. Right now, I'd like to open up for any questions that we may have.
All right, thanks, Byron. We had a question come through. And just a reminder for everyone, again, at the top, if you want to ask a question, type in at the Q&A button at the top. The question we had come through was, which components of Visual Studio or TFS will I need for automated testing?
All right, so that's a good question. Not everything that I showed here is something that you're going to get necessarily with your standard MSDN licensing. The coded UI test components come with your premium subscription, your premium Visual Studio. With that, you get the ability to record tests and to modify tests. If you have recorded tests from Test Manager, you can import those. What you don't get is the Microsoft Test and Lab Manager. So you can get the Microsoft Test and Lab Manager by getting a license of test elements, which includes the Test Manager, or if you have upgraded your Visual Studio Premium to Visual Studio Ultimate, then you get the entire suite, which also includes the Test and Lab Manager. So make sure that if you want to use the Test and Lab Manager that you've worked with your local rep to get the proper licensing.
All right, thank you, Byron. If anyone else has a question, please type it in at this moment. Byron, do you have any other little tips or anything for anyone out there while we wait?
Well, you know, there's actually quite a lot here to get into, and it's, if anything, it's very difficult for me to throttle back and not and make sure that I don't get too much in the weeds. There's just a lot here that you can do with the automated testing components. It's really a nice step in the right direction from a Microsoft offering, where they've really done a lot to help the testers on projects become very, very involved with what the development team is doing. And these tool sets, as I've demonstrated, really starts to blur the line between what the testers do and what the development team does. The testers have created their scripts and they're able to record them, they're able to play them back. Those test scripts then become part of an automated test suite that either the testers can run from Visual Studio, they can work with the developers to have these tests brought into Visual Studio and executed on a regular basis. So if you do a nightly build or some type of dev integrated build that you like to have these executed upon at a regular interval, you can easily set that up so that when you do an automated build process, you can flag these tests. I'm not going to get into it because it's probably another 15, 20 minutes to walk through this. But you can flag the tests as a certain category that the automated build can then kick off and run and have the results ready for you when you come in the morning or what have you. So it's really, really nice and integrates very nicely with the concept of how the developers work within the unit test kind of frame of mind, and brings a little bit more integrated tests to bear, and really does a lot to get testing done very, very closely to when the code is built, because that's when you're really going to get a lot of that testing advantage. So because of that, I'm very, very excited around what this is going to do for development teams as a whole.
Byron, we did have a question come through. Thank you for sharing that with everyone. The question is there a way to import, export the written test cases in lab management to, say, a third party like HP Quality Center?
One of the things you can do, so you can import them from Quality Center. If you go up to CodePlex, there is a supported release of a utility, and I believe it's called Quality Center 2 Team to Test Manager, 2, the number 2. I've not actually executed that myself, but from what I understand, it's a fairly decent tool. It should be available in a release format. If not, I know it's available for the release candidate not more than about a month ago. Also, if you've got test cases written in Excel, there are import utilities that you can map your Excel test cases so that you can pull them into TFS. So there are quite a few things out there that help you so that you don't, if you want to move over into the new tool set that Microsoft is offering, you don't have to go through a tremendous amount of rework of rewriting all your manual tests. Now, if you need to, say, port your existing automated tests over into Visual Studio, I am not aware of a mechanism that allows us to do that today. That's not to say that a vendor won't come up with a solution because it seems like a really great idea, but I'm not aware of an offering at this point.
Another question that came through was, is this tool a replacement for other open source web testing tools like Selenium?
That's a really good question. I've actually got a fairly decent history with Selenium, having used it for quite a bit. Let me think about this, because it really depends on how you're using Selenium. Selenium could, to a certain degree, be an enhancement or something you can use along with the Visual Studio's components. Probably the only thing that you'd need to modify, depending on how you're using Selenium, if you take Selenium and use it as a unit test within Visual Studio, the only thing you have to modify is what framework you're using. Instead of in-unit, you want to use the unit test framework that Microsoft gives you. Other than that, the changes are very minor. The only thing is that you kind of start to lose some of the advantages that one tool gives over the other. So if you're going to do things in Selenium, do things in Selenium. If you're going to do it in Visual Studio, then do it in Visual Studios. One of the caveats is that currently Selenium you cannot record in Internet Explorer, but you can record Internet Explorer using the Visual Studio tools. So that's certainly an advantage right there. They both have a different way of creating the methods for you to interact with the applications at playback. And it depends on how well you code and how much maintenance you want to put into that. But there's certainly an advantage there to using tools like Selenium. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Thanks, Byron. If there are no further questions, we would like to thank you for a wonderful presentation. Again, we will be forwarding out the recorded version of this presentation when it becomes available. If you have any further questions about this presentation or Neudesic in general, please feel free to email Byron at byron.goodman@neudesic.com. You are now free to disconnect. Thank you again for joining us.